Fantastic. Well, thank you for joining the Innoflex Solutions webinar. My name is Lisa Apolinski. I will be your moderator for today. And our discussion in this half hour that we have together is being agile during packaging material transitioning. This is actually, I think, not only a very timely topic, but a really important conversation to be having right now as we're trying to navigate post-COVID, the great resignation, supplier issues, gas prices, you name it, bad things are happening. And we need to be able to be agile in order to keep our businesses running, keep our manufacturing floor being optimized. I just wanted to do a couple of quick housekeeping items. First of all, I've recorded this. This is being recorded. It will be available on demand. We will send out an email sometime next week where you'll be able to access the recording on demand, share it with your colleagues, review it again if you need to. I'll also include in that email contact information for both our speakers today, Robert and Jose. So be on the lookout for that. This is supposed to be a discussion. This is live. We want you to be discussing. So please put any of your questions into the chat box. We will be stopping throughout the webinar to check those questions and have a great conversation. And on that note, I'm going to go ahead and ask Robert and Jose to quickly add their contact information into the chat box now, so that you have that. And again, it will be also shared in the email that goes out next week. So let me go ahead and introduce our speakers. First, we have Robert Champion. Robert is the CEO of Innoflex Solutions, who is sponsoring this webinar today. Robert has over 30 years of experience within the industry, and he is considered a global thought leader in packaging equipment engineering strategy and management. And he has worked with several Fortune 100 CPG multinational companies. He will bring a lot of insight into the conversation. Our additional speaker is Jose Luis Dueñas. He is the owner of Valley Packaging with nearly 25 years of experience, and he is considered an expert in technical packaging in the food and beverage industries for primary, secondary, and tertiary materials and corresponding equipment. And he has worked in multiple packaging technology related functions. Gentlemen, I'm very excited to be witnessing this conversation, and I will hand it over to you, Robert and Jose.
Well, good morning, good afternoon, or early afternoon for those of you who've joined. Thank you, Lisa, for kicking this off. And this is an exciting time. We're going to try to squeeze in more than an hour's worth of content in 30 minutes. We want to give you enough flavor. So Jose Luis Dueñas from Valley Packaging is here. And again, Robert Champion here from Innoflex Solutions. And we picked a topic called transitioning, material transitioning. And there's a lot going on today, as Lisa said, with the great resignation and with, a lack of products being in your facility on time from a logistics standpoint and being able to stay in operations. So you got to use multiple suppliers to keep your operations going. And you have existing equipment that, maybe some of the new materials haven't been baselined against. So we're going to talk through that and how to win. So Jose, we've got some outtakes of this webinar that's going to be very important. And I guess the most important thing is, sourcing and the headwinds that are coming at most companies today, how to get through that and get through it quickly and sustainably, and then make sure that you can make money by doing that. So there are a couple of things we want to get. A couple of key points is dismiss the myth about not meeting production goals because of issues, right? We want to eliminate these myths and deal with reality, and also overcome constraints that you may be facing in operation, and understanding the overall landscape of your industry, whether you're in food and bev, pharma, or CPG industries, or typical industries that are similar, how this plays and to help you win. So Jose, I like to kick off and start talking about leadership, because I think it has to start at the top as far as an organization. So really, we got about 3 questions we're going to try to go into. So the first one is about leadership and reducing timelines. How does leadership play from your perspective and what you've seen, and helps the organization, whether you're a matrix organization, a top-down organization with several layers or lean, also with roadblocks and how to get around these roadblocks and how they operate today. And also about, short and long-term goals that leadership now with this pressure of transitioning can help organizations get through. What are your thoughts on any of those points as you start thinking?
Sure. No, thank you, Robert. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. And yeah, just like you mentioned, cross-functional collaboration is absolutely critical for any transition, regardless of the reason why you're transitioning, right? You could be changing materials because of a sustainability KPIs need, or because backup supplier, or because you're having an issue with your supplier, wherever that person or location is situated, and you need to do it quickly. So one is you need to have this cross-functional team very clearly where they need to operate with the silos broken, right? And where one key attribute is that leadership that will step beyond those silos and beyond those I thinking, right? If there's a situation where the team is facing a problem because X function is having an issue, the others will jump and push and help, right? It's not like, okay, right. my function is covered. That's up to him or her. Like, no, that needs to go, needs to be broken. And I will call this cross-functional collaboration. One analogy that I have is like dancing, right? Like a ballroom dancing. Okay. It's coordination. It's multiple people dancing at the same time. So everybody needs to put 100% from their function. So right here is no finger pointing. I will say that's the golden rule, right? There should be no finger pointing. Everyone's it's involved. And one thing that we've discovered, Robert, when we have worked together is that sense of urgency, right? Understanding the sense of urgency of the other functions. Just to put an example, right? When I used to work in corporate positions, right? I used to think that the people in factory were nuts and they will not listen to our recommendations. But now when I came finally back again to the factory, right? The sense of urgency in the factory, it's now. It needs to happen in the next 20 minutes, not in next week or in 2 weeks. So that understanding of the needs of the ultimate client, which is your factory, your operations people, they are the ones who need to be driving the pace and the rhythm. That's my key insight. What do you think, Robert?
No, I think you're spot on. When you talk about sense of urgency, and you hit it right on the head, you have to understand the operations of your functions, the other functions. So how do you understand their goals? And, in the collaborative way, so that the end goal is X. So how do you understand someone else's position when you're not in their role? And with the time crunch, how do you do that? And then how do you not finger point when there's a crisis, right? So I think on the front end leadership, I agree with you, Jose, has to set the precedent as far as what the goals are in each function, not just the goals, but then how to work through, tribulations and trials. Like, for instance, if things are not going to go well, what's the, as you said, on the dance floor, what's the playing field? So everyone, when it doesn't go well, you can still work through those things, because the headwinds today, you have very little time to solve these problems when you're trying to get product on shelf and compete with competition. You really got to get that through the organization mindset. So I think you have to work through, baby boomers all the way to Generation Zs, whatever your organization demographics are. You got to work through all these different cultures in your organization to make that happen. So I think you're spot on. And I think I was at an Automate show in Detroit here this Monday and Tuesday, Automate 2022. And there was a lot of talk with suppliers about when they go into organizations to sell their equipment, that they have to learn the culture of the organization, and then, collaborate with them on what they're trying to sell and what the organization can absorb, because it doesn't always match, especially with people not being in the office today as many, for obvious reasons. But I think you're right, Jose. I think the mindset needs to be, whether it's a matrix organization or top down, is to find the key drivers of the organization, and make sure that you're having that constant dialogue with your partner, your cross-functional person. Otherwise, you don't know, when it's not going to work well for them, they can't come and talk to you because you guys don't have a relationship. So I think you're spot on. Anything else from your side, Jose, that you see?
No, not additional. Just mention everything, and maybe probably we can ask Lisa if there may be some questions from the audience.
So I don't see any questions right now, but I do have a question. So, and Robert, I'm going to pose this to you.
Sure.
You talked about the Great Resignation, which we know is absolutely affecting functional output for everybody, right? Not just manufacturing, just across the board. So how has that really started to push innovation on the manufacturing floor?
Wow. So innovation doesn't change the goals for innovation, Lisa. Good question first from the audience. So if we just backpedal real quickly, Great Resignation started years, right? It wasn't just the pandemic that spurred it on. There's been data, the Harvard Business Review, if you pick up the March the 22nd, 2022, go online and download it, you'll read that they call it the 5 R's. And I won't get into it, but they talk about the reason for the Great Resignation. So as far as innovation, and Lisa attached to this is the Automate show. I was there 2 days. And what the suppliers were saying was that because resources may be available or not available for whatever reason, that those are people, that the manufacturers now have to accelerate their investments on CapEx. They have to not worry about the payback period being 2 years or 5 years, whatever the threshold is. Their goal is they have to produce those goods that people want to buy. They're committed. So they have to invest in automation. So the Great Resignation has driven manufacturers of equipment and food suppliers to do things quicker, to maintain and be in business. So there's a great opportunity for the right automation and also training resources, shifting resources within the facility to where they need to play now. So it's really causing organizations to restructure where people need to be and using technology where it operates, where availability may not be there for people today. So that's a great question. Great question.
Fantastic. I'm just going to remind our attendees, please go ahead and use the chat box for questions. Again, we want this to be a really good conversation, and I'm already learning things, which is fantastic. Robert, Jose, I will hand it back over to you as I don't see any other questions in the chat box right now.
Yeah, thank you. That's a very good question. So, I mean, now we talk about leadership and timelines. Our first question, I'm going to say that's strategy. So, Jose and I have gone into organizations and done projects on CapEx. And the first thing we talk about is what's the strategy of the organization? What do you want to do now, year 1 through year 3 or year 5, year X? And then try to attach solutions around your strategy that makes sense for your business. So as we start talking about that, the strategy, now we start talking about the tactical, what you do with that strategy. So if you're a manufacturer, we're talking about right now materials, Jose, relative to, what's a required, a nice to have, and a must have on materials when we're talking about shifting and transitioning suppliers, bringing in new suppliers quickly, and also on the equipment side, what are nice to haves and must haves so that you can operate efficiently in this Great Resignation. So as I think about that, Jose, a couple things come to my mind. Do we look at operational windows, and operational windows meaning on the material side and the food side, what capabilities are required or the tolerance of those materials that are allowed, that should be given to that team member to do their role in this operational system, and also applications like, again, should the materials, and now I'm going to transition into equipment, also be looking at the capabilities of the equipment so there's a good marriage. You talk about dancing on the floor, right? You gotta have a good partner, right? And then also, if you talk about external material suppliers, external equipment suppliers, how do they play in also helping the end customer, the food manufacturer and producer, stay nimble and agile in this transitioning period when they have to move fast? So normally that's like a 18 to 2 year talk about engagement, talking about new materials, testing them, getting them signed off, getting them in, external people feedback, consumer feedback and studies. Now you've got to do it quicker. So what are your thoughts around that when we talk about must-haves and nice-to-haves, and how do you separate that out so that you can move and transition?
Yeah, no, that's a great insight, Robert. And as you mentioned, right? So we need to understand, when I say we, the cross-functional team, making the transition of the material, understand what are those key attributes of your packaging material, right? And I think you need to categorize them in different sections. So for instance, do I have some attributes that are functionality? Then some of those are there because of regulatory needs, or or some of those are there just aesthetics and appealing, how the packaging is going to look like. So once you have that understanding, then you will have this cross-functional, some industries call it must-have, right? So that prioritization where you say which attributes is a must to have and why. Probably your category will tell you why. Well, this is a regulatory, so it must have. It needs to be tamper evident, right? Because it's a medicine. Okay, so it's a must-have. Now the appearance of it, the glossy appearance, or varnish on whatever material is, well, that's a nice to have. And those compromises, depending on the timeline that you have. When I say you, all of us, when we have, it's the ones that will drive, we move forward, or we are going after certain key attributes. And also you mentioned, right, I think it was spot on when the analogy that now you make between the interaction between the packaging material and your equipment, your processing equipment, it's like marriage, right? It's absolutely critical. So both in a marriage, they need to give 100%. It's not 50-50 now, it's 100% on both material and equipment, and they need to be properly balanced. When I say balance is, we need to think about what are the variability that the material will bring in the day-to-day. I have been in some situations where the variability of the material, let's say a carton and its word, it changes from box to box or from lot to lot, and unfortunately, that's where your operators need to, be tweaking the settings of the equipment to make it work. But unfortunately, there's some of the key attributes that are not under control that go up and down on the upper and lower limit, and that drives everybody crazy, right? The whole organization. So that needs to be put under control. And it's looking now into the operator side, it's not okay that you have the morning shift and the material is working okay, has good quality, and suddenly comes the guy on afternoon shift, and suddenly because this guy it's a 40-year-old tenure or senior, just start changing the whatever setting on the equipment. That's not okay either, right? So that's why when I say it needs to be properly balanced, both material and equipment. What do you think, Robert?
Well, you bring up a very interesting point. And again, I'm going to go back to the Automate show, downtown Detroit, big show with all the suppliers from all different industries. Again, I'm going to go back to that. And the conversations that I had with them, they told me this. They said there's a lot of push for getting automation in factories today. As we just talked about the Great Resignation, let's just call it that, right? And the driver for that. But they said they're going to be paying for that in year 2 and year 3, because the performance that they think they're going to achieve is not going to be there, because as you said, Jose, what is missing, I'm going to use this term, 4 inputs that you called out, variability, that are either in materials, and we're going to, our next topic is going to tie into this, material capability and variances, not knowing it, the people capability. And now we talk about people, less people, right? So meaning for whatever reasons, again, we won't get into that. Read the Harvard Business Review again, article, March 2022. You'll get the information. But we're talking about just people not being able to get the tribal knowledge because people are not there. So how do we get that information into the equipment? So we talk about the variability on the operators, the product variability, because what happens from shift to shift, SKU to SKU, right? And then we're going to talk about modes of operation. This is where a lot of the companies and food manufacturers, not so much in pharma, but some of the food manufacturers, because of different types of products that they deal with, get in trouble. And modes of operation, you called it out earlier, Jose, means how does the end customer run that equipment? Their internal regulatory engagement. We don't have time to get into it, but it means you can buy a standard piece of equipment and materials, right? You get all that baseline, but the end customer operates it differently because they do things because of FDA requirements or CE requirements, safety requirements that or other regulatory guidelines that they have to interface with that equipment, and causes it to operate differently. And what happens is you now don't get the throughput you thought you would because it had unplanned production stops. And so if we're going to now move forward to this great resignation with more automation, is it sustainable? So they need companies that can go in and help them on the front end on CapEx investments, start looking through these areas to uncover these variabilities. So when you install the equipment and the materials and the product, they dance on the floor correctly, sustainably for a very long time. And again, we can't get into all the other, there's some fine details we can't get into here that also aid in doing this, but at the these four areas, these four inputs are very, very important for success in the material and equipment. So the nice to have and must to have sometimes are also misnomers, because as you said, Jose, earlier, one group thinks that these are important. Marketing and sales think that this is important. Engineering think this is important. Operations thinks this is important. The factory think this is important. The supplier doesn't know because we don't communicate well to the external material and equipment supplier. So what you have is this rhythm that goes up and down in performance. And again, it's great. Go ahead, Lisa.
Yeah, let me pile in on that conversation, because you're talking about who's deciding what's important. One of the questions I have, and Jose, I'm going to pose this to you. So I know there's discussions now in reducing SKUs, right? And SKU reduction can do a couple of things. It can reduce costs, but it can also open up capacity on the production floor. Which do you feel is more important for the manufacturer, or how should they determine which is more important? Can they even determine which is more important?
Yeah, I think that they can. Most of the time, the solution may not be so evident for an organization, because you have what we call the shop blindness, right? So you have been doing your operations, many years or whatever, and then you have partners like Robert, Innoflex company, or Valley Packaging, my company, where we can help you out discover if the way you are directing your product flow in the lines that you have is the most appropriate. So Robert and I just work just to give you an example with a client of us where they had 80% of the volume makers, that volume could be changed into something more automated, but they also have a lot of SKUs that were very little volume that they needed to provide. It's not like they needed to rationalize. They made the exercise. It could have brought a lot of extra capacity in their lines, but they needed, because their customers needed that material, so they couldn't just chop it and stop producing them. So we just gave them an opportunity, hey, let's automate, what makes sense, the 80% of your volume, we move it into something, with more automation and less labor. And then the labor that you have, you just relocate it where it makes sense, this more labor and manual operations that makes sense. So it's kind of a balance depending on the occasion. So it's not like one or the other are more important. Right. But both need to be looked at depending on the circumstance, and it's case to case, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. So we actually have a couple of questions.
Sure.
Thaxton, I'm going to start with yours first. So Thaxton wrote, speaking of material sourcing, with the introduction of new biopolymer materials, is it feasible for large food manufacturers and CPGs to switch from traditional petroleum-based polymers to these newer biopolymers, being that there's often a much smaller supply available, and this could lead to supply chain disruptions? That's actually an excellent question.
It is.
Yep. Yeah, if may take it. So great question, Thaxton. And in terms of the feasibility, one is polypropylene coming from oil source, and the other one is biopolypropylamide coming from whatever the source. They are both polypropylene, so that's no problem. For it should make no effect on your operations. But coming from the sourcing, I think your procurement people really needs to make sure that they are looking ahead. Because everybody wants a piece of that very little available volume of whatever the biopolymer is, and they're going to be fighting for it. So probably it may not make more sense in the big scale of things to go into this transition. So what I will recommend is something called life cycle assessment, right? Like, does it make sense to do the transition into a biopolymer, or more invest into moving into a oil-based polymer that is, let's say, if you don't have a recyclable polymer, can you go from one to another that is recyclable, and even though it's oil sourced? I don't know if that makes sense and if I answer your question. But it's depending on the case. But yeah, again, it's a cross-functional collaboration, especially with your sourcing or procurement team.
Fantastic. And Robert, I think this one is for you. It's from Mark. And I think this is also an excellent question. Finding automation techs is the hardest thing right now with the plant. Is this an issue in the new process plan, finding the automation techs that can run the automation?
Yeah, so that goes back, and thank you for the question, Mark. So I challenge automation companies to say, think like the end user. So the automation should be, it should be behind the scenes, like, it should run itself with very little operator intervention, unless there is a change of material or a change of product. So to answer Mark's question, finding out the automation techs, they are harder to find, but some of the suppliers are simplifying the equipment so the capabilities don't require a lot of programming. It's all encased in the operations. And what you get, Mark, is you get feedback on the operator screen with trends on what's going on, so you don't have to go in and program anything until it's really needed. So you just eliminate the downtime that you're going to have in programming. You're exactly right. So they're kind of, you're great question, but the answer is, yeah, the auto techs are hard to find. So we're trying to eliminate the need to do that extensive programming. Great question. Any more, Lisa?
No, those are the two questions that came up in the chat box. Thank you both for those questions. We only have a few minutes left, so I will let you, Robert, continue on with talking about standards and procedures, which I think is also quite critical, because that can get thrown out the window when things start going south.
Yeah, we don't have enough time, but what we'll do, we'll get into real quickly. So, Jose, if we look at that, we talk about functions and communications and standards and procedures. Is this still important? And if so, where should that information lie? Should it be in manuals? Should it be hard copies? Should it be digital? And if digital, should it be readily available on, say, the manufacturing system, so those that are operating it can do something with it? What are your thoughts about that?
And it's absolutely critical, right? So they are needed. And you need to think about those, the industry call it SOPs, standard operational procedure. They need to be useful, right? They really need to be easy to understand, or for the end user, really accessible, and really help the function, whatever the function is. Like, it also depends if your standard or your procedure, is it for what function? Is it for the operator on the line? Is it for the QA specialist or technician? Or is it for your maintenance people to keep up a good condition of your equipment? Now, why is it critical, right? Sometimes you have this tribal knowledge that it's on the heads of your oldest operators or your engineers, and it's nowhere in digital, nowhere for you to capture it and retain it, right? One good example that I have is, for instance, in the breakfast cereal manufacturing. So you have the top players is General Mills and Kellogg's, and these guys are really good at vertical form fill sealers or cartoning, and they know they have a lot of really good materials on processes and procedures, and capturing and retaining all that knowledge that could be lost when you change operators or people change from company to company. And I have seen a really good example is in the Germans. The Germans are really good on keeping their tribal knowledge, but they do something, they call it apprenticeship, right? in some of the examples that I have seen in the US and also in Mexico is that when you are transitioning an operator, the way you train it is, the new guy, it's just shadowing the more experienced operator. And there's no really manual or checklist or anything that they will follow. So there's no structure at all. But what I see working pretty well is this apprenticeship program that the Germans are doing in any of their functions and roles in the factory, and they go based in very specific and structured manuals and processes that are really well written, used, and I think another one good thing to consider, Robert, what you think is about, should it be digital, should it be printed, should it be wearing an iPad, or what are your thoughts about that one?
Yeah, so there's this machine learning is key. We can't get into that right now, but you've got a lot of smart devices on equipment and systems. So leverage those systems to get the information back out to where you can use it. So whether it's on your HMI or digital, iPhone or iPad, is getting what the condition of your operation is, the behavior, and that's a continuous virtuous cycle of learning. And then you can go and make improvements on track and trend data around that. So I think it's moving more toward digital, and because it's happening real time and there's changes, you can capture it versus trying to land it on some copy, which may not be apropos anymore, right? You made some maintenance, makes a change on the equipment, it's no longer the same. So real time data is really what we want. So unfortunately, we can't get into a lot more. I mean, we're almost at the end of this 30 minutes, so I feel bad, but maybe we do another round here in the next couple of months, Jose. What do you think?
Yeah, no, I think we can definitely, take these standards and procedures and the retention of knowledge into another webinar. So looking forward to have that deeper insight on this topic.
Yeah. So Lisa, I think from our perspective, I'm going to wrap this up in a bow. The transitioning, there's a lot of key points. One is leadership must be engaged to drive the ship and give guidance. And then when that's the strategic level, it's tactical is on the materials and equipment. It's really trying to define what you need, right? What is going to produce saleable product that you're trying to sell? What is just like noise, candy to have later or some sweet stuff that's not really required, and define that, put it on the shelf until you can do it. If it's not driving your innovation and renovation, then and there's no CapEx or no return on it, then you have to think about that. And the third one is, it's also tactical. You got to have repetitive routines in place, and you capture that through standards and SOPs, as Jose said, that you can bring in someone right out of college, or out of a tech center, someone from another organization into your company, because there's a lot of that going on. If you look at the 5 R's in this great, what we call it, resignation, Harvard Business Review, I'm just pinging that again. It talks about people moving now from company to company for various reasons. You need to maintain your throughput. So yeah, thank you. I mean, I'm glad that we were able to talk here, Jose.
Yeah, thank you. It was an honor, and thank you.
Yeah, thank you to both of our speakers, Jose, Robert. This was a great conversation. I know we could talk for another hour on this topic. It's very easy to kind of go down the rabbit hole. But I want to thank our attendees for the great questions and for the great conversation. Just again, please be on the lookout. An email will be sent out that will have a link to the on-demand webinar so that you can review it, share it with colleagues, and it will also have both Robert and Jose's contact information. And speaking of emails, be sure to subscribe to Inoflex Solutions e-newsletter. You can go to the homepage of the website, inoflexsolutions.com, and enter your email address so that you will get articles and topics and other content from Inoflex Solutions. And if there's one thing I can leave you with, it's this: the key to being agile is being in the know. I'm Lisa Apolinsky. Thank you so much for attending.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure.